So, we've been asked what, why do we like slam poetry so much?
I like slam poetry because it is a way to connect with an audience and it's an opportunity to evoke emotion and allow people to feel a particular thing. Sometimes when you're writing poetry that will go in a book, you don't know how it connects with an audience. And what I like about slam poetry is that you can know pretty quickly whether or not you're connecting with the audience. And I think that's important as poets to remember that well, for some people, depending on your philosophy, that there is an audience and to connect with them with poetry.
Right, I completely agree with you. That audience aspect is so key. That's why, practicing performance and everything like that is so important to the entire aspect of slam poetry. But, what a lot of people don't even realize is that, we call it slam poetry, but, you know, it doesn't, there's really no such thing as slam poetry. There's poetry that you can bring onto a stage, right?
Right, right. I would agree with that. And I think that sometimes those lines get drawn between, academic poetry, I don't know, street poetry, and
Mhm.
sometimes those lines are a demarcation of age or socioeconomic status or topics. And I think that we should begin to erase some of those lines. And that's what I do appreciate about slam poetry is that it is a stage where anyone can get up and write about and share whatever their different topics that they're writing about. Is I don't think there's necessarily any taboo topics for slam poetry, but I do think that you find that a lot in traditional page poetry, and I think that's an unfortunate thing. But I do like that slam poetry is open to everyone.
Yeah, and one of my favorite poets actually has a quote. Adam Faulkner. He says, when asked why he appreciates slam poetry so much and why he does slam poetry, he always says people can call our work whatever they need to in order to feel better about the fact that they don't go to sleep when we're reading poems.
Yeah, that's a great quote. Poetry should not be putting people to sleep. It just should not be. And what I one way to keep people awake, I think about some poetry that I love is the different art forms. So whether that's music, whether that's theater, so getting to act. There are just so many, or dance, different elements that you can bring into slam poetry that I just think is phenomenal.
Right. It's essentially like when you're the poet in a slam poem or on stage with poetry, like you're the director, you're the
Mhm,
producer, you're the actor of that story that you have written,
mhm.
and that's why it's so amazing watching youth engage in this art form, because seeing them, taking a poem and dancing on stage, or taking a poem and singing it on
Yeah.
stage, or acting it out. I saw a slam poem one time where the actor was pretending to be a character from Wizard of Oz and
Oh, cool.
reinterpreting the character and giving them a whole new viewpoint just using a poem.
Wow. That's phenomenal. I also love that slam poetry allows for people, especially young people, to work with someone else. So I've loved when I've seen two poets, or you get three or four more poets on a stage, and it's almost like readers theater, but it's just beautiful because I think it shows poets how to collaborate and work together, because we don't always do that, because this is my poem, this is my vision. But then when you start working with other poets and now you're performing with other poets, I think it is a great way for an artist to just grow and to develop.
Right, and figuring out that your story actually connects with other people.
Yes.
It takes that audience to a whole new level when you're able to not only connect with the audience who's cheering you on, but with other poets on that stage.
Yes, I would agree with that because one of the things that I love about poetry is that you can take a story that is unique to you, but then tell like a universal story or an experience. And I think that when you're doing slam poetry, you find those universal moments by your connections with the audience. I wrote a poem, I have a poem called Six Poems for Phantom Grandfathers. And I was writing about, not knowing my grandfather. And friend of mine came up to me and said he really related to that poem and he gave examples from the poem. And I just wouldn't have thought that me writing about not growing up knowing my grandfathers, and I was very detailed in the poem, would connect with someone else who had a similar experience. So that was really cool.
Yeah, there's so much power behind slam poetry. People say it's a movement, people say it's not real, people say all these things about it, but I don't think it's going away anytime soon.
No, I would agree. And I would just say, I think that it's just a modern day version of oral storytelling. Back
Yep.
when we were reading about, Greek and how they would tell those stories orally. I think that's just what slam poetry is. It's just, I don't know if I would say it's more sophisticated because I don't know what they were doing way back then. But I think that it's going to be around because slam poetry, a lot of it is story and humans connect with stories. And I think that slam poetry is here to stay.
It's definitely here to stay, and it's so accessible for everyone. Anyone can do it. You don't need a like degree in poetry. You don't need you don't even really need to understand poetic structure to be able to get on that stage and tell your story.
I would agree. And I think that what I like about slam poetry is that it's an equal opportunity. I won't say employer, but you know what I mean. I think that's what, to me, that should be our goal in all art forms, is that if someone is interested and someone wants to do it, let's open the door. I think it's fine to teach folks form and all those things, but to not allow those things to be barriers. And what's cool about slam poetry is because it kind of throws out all those rules. It's actually become quite creative because of that.
Yeah, that creativity is key. So thank you for meeting with me today and discussing this.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.